We're going to talk about victims of crime today. That's the theme of our chapter 6, victims of crime and violence. And of course, we're talking about a group of Plains Indians that were forced down onto a really ugly place in Oklahoma that turned out to have oil, this huge pool of oil underneath the land. And somehow they were able to maintain their mineral rights. I guess it was the lawyer. He was half Sioux and half Osage. And he was able to maintain the mineral rights. So they had rights to all the oil underneath the land, and they discovered this great big puddle of water, a puddle of oil. So they were making millions of dollars a year. I mean, all these people, they were literally the richest people in the world, this tribe of Osage Indians. So if you're ever watching an old movie from the 30s or the 40s, potentially if they're talking about an Indian from Oklahoma, they're making fun of them because they have so much money. I just watched a movie like that a couple weeks ago, where the guy had a roll of bills, this big, and he pulls it out of his pocket and he just gives it to these guys. He says, I make $10,000 a day from my oil rights. And then, of course, everybody became his friend. All the white people became his friend because he's so rich. While most feel sympathy toward victims who have experienced crime and or violence, sometimes we blame victims for their plight. It's their fault. As a matter of fact, this may be what's going on with select individuals. Is that a wasp? Yeah, it's a wasp. This may be what's going on with Christine Blasi Ford as far as Republicans are concerned. Yeah, maybe she was sexually molested, but she had that one beer. That's what Trump said yesterday. I don't know if anybody was listening to what the hell the crazy man was saying, but yesterday he's saying, well, I just had one beer. I just had one beer. I just had one beer. He kept saying that in his speech. Where was it? Mississippi. It was in Mississippi. Jackass. I know. Stop complaining about the president. Anyway, so sometimes we blame the victims. So we don't know what to do. We don't know what's going on with Kavanaugh. Do we blame Kavanaugh for being a drunk, and when he's drunk, maybe he gets a little bit sexually, not aroused, that's not really the right word, aggressive? He gets aggressive with his sexuality? Is that what happened? And can we blame him? They had a panel of women from Florida, and one of the women said, that's what all 17-year-old boys do. Do they? Or do they? I gotta know. Do they? Do all 17-year-old boys try to take women's bathing suit? She was in a bathing. 15-year-old, she's only 15. Is that what men do? All 17-year-old boys? That's what she said. I can remember being 17, but evidently I was never around anybody that had a bathing suit on. So. Rats. Missed that. And not only that, I didn't drink, so as boring as that is. I've already told you, I have 2 ex-wives that say I was the most boring person in the world. Evidently it had something to do with alcohol. Maybe I needed to get them drunk. That way they would have thought I was exciting, despite the fact I was boring as hell. One reason for this is the need to believe in a just world, and of course people, and that's what's going on with some of the people on the right. They want Kavanaugh to be nominated to the Supreme Court, and they don't care how it's done. They want a just world. So evidently, Christine Blasi Ford is a liar. That lady Ramirez is a liar. Or it was her fault. Maybe she walked in on Kavanaugh when he was getting dressed, and he displayed himself to her. That's what happened with Ramirez, theoretically. But we'll find out at the end of the week, because the FBI is investigating. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. You never know what's going to happen next. So the problem is, are we blaming the victim in this case? And we can, you can answer this any way you want, but it may be that we're actually blaming the victim. And have we been doing this for, I don't know, centuries? It's the woman's fault. We blame the woman for the way that she dresses. We blame the woman for being there in a place where the guy can potentially molest her. It's her fault. She went out with him to begin with. She should have known that it was dangerous. Really? She shouldn't have taken that drink. It's her fault. So we're blaming the victim. And this is a perfect example. Wow, this is great. I'm teaching this chapter about victimology, and of course we've got this going on with Kavanaugh and Ford, and Ramirez and Swetnick. There's another lady, and now there are other women that are saying that he was sexually aggressive when he was drunk. So is it important that he was a drinker?
At that young age, yeah.
Should that disqualify him? This man drank too much when he was in high school, and he drank too much when he was in college. Should that disqualify him from being on the Supreme Court?
Of course. Well, I don't know. I think so.
Should it disqualify him from being on the Supreme Court? Just because he drank too much?
It's not because he drank too much. I think it's because he didn't admit that he was doing illegal things at that young age when he shouldn't have been. That's what got him into that situation, which would probably potentially lead him to be more lenient in cases like that.
And that's why he won't admit that he drank too much.
Because he lied and hid the fact. Not only he did it, but he lied as well.
He's not owning up to it.
But half of the Senate, the people on the right, don't think that that is a lie. That not telling the truth about drinking is not that big a deal.
At that young age, it was a big deal.
Well,
And now that he's older, he's a whole
I would
time
agree.
limit.
well, this is kind of interesting. Should we disqualify anybody that's a drinker? Should we only have teetotalers on the Supreme Court? Okay. Is there anybody in here that's never had a drink of alcohol? I got one. Okay. All right. Just remember, in case you ever, they ever try to put you on the Supreme Court, raise your hand and say, yeah, I used to drink. Okay. Well, except for Monique, she doesn't need to. You're good to go. Okay. You can be on the Supreme Court without any problem. How about being drunk? How many people have been drunk? Just me? I'm the only one? I have two? I have three. Four? 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 Is that it? You've never been drunk? This is what you got. Okay. You never been drunk?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. Am I going to have to bring the Senate here to question you to get that information?
Well, this coming weekend. I'm joking.
You never been drunk? Never? Wait a minute, let's ask Travis. Travis, you ever been drunk?
Yeah.
Okay.
Blacked out.
Not today.
Not today.
Yeah, it's not easy, is it? I mean, telling people that you've been drunk. I tell my stories, I've been drunk 3 times. And I hated it all 3 times. Got sick, threw up. I don't think I ever molested anybody that I can remember. Did I black out? No, I don't think I did, but I guess if you black out, do you really know that you blacked out is the only question. Okay, and that's what's going on right now. And he needed to tell people. If he had said in the beginning, yeah, when I was in high school, I was a pretty good drinker. And yeah, maybe I was a little silly. If he had said that in the beginning, he probably would be okay right now. But
a little bit in trouble,
yeah, now he's in trouble. And now he's getting really emotional about this stuff. Okay. Alcohol. How important is that? Well, in his case, it's real important. As far as the rest of us are concerned, nobody really cares. The assumption is that everybody drinks, but of course that's not true either. We've got Monique in the back, and she's never had it. There you go. Okay, congratulations. All right. Some people don't drink. And I haven't had a drink since 1976, so there you go. I mean, that's a long time.
My mom was born.
I was, since your mother was born. Didn't have anything to do with your mother, okay? I stopped drinking in 1976 because I was a single parent, and I thought it was irresponsible. You know, I needed to take care of my kids, and I was the only parent. So being drunk was, I mean, that was silly. Anyway, that's why I gave up drinking. And that and the fact that I always reacted in a negative manner when I drank. And the negativity was I got depressed. Okay, all right. And that's a stupid reason to get drunk. God, I'm feeling too good today. I think I'm gonna get drunk, and so I don't feel so good. Okay, that's perfect. Generally, when considering someone else's actions, we use dispositional attributions that focus on the person's ability level, personality, or even temporary states, such as fatigue, they were tired, as explanations for conduct in question. And of course, if Kavanaugh had admitted what was going on, we would probably make excuses for his potentially molesting Christine Blasi Ford, allegedly molesting her or attempting to molest her. But of course, since he didn't admit it, now it sounds like he has lied. So we have to decide what we're going to do with him. You should be proud of the fact that you're from Arizona, if you are from Arizona. If you're from New Mexico, you'd have nothing to be proud of. But if you're from Arizona, it's your senator that forced the FBI, forced the Senate to investigate Mr. Kavanaugh. He's the one that said, yes, I'll vote for him, but you have to have an FBI investigation. So now we're going to have an FBI investigation. It's going to be over at the end of this week, and it was Jeff Flake that did that. If it hadn't been for Jeff Flake, he probably would be a Supreme Court justice right now without any investigation, any further investigation. So if you're from Arizona, you should be proud of your senator. However, Jeff Flake, of course, is not up for re-election. He's decided he doesn't want to be a politician anymore. So despite the fact that he is the hero, he's also is leaving public office. So there you go.
Probably writing Kane's journals and like, hell.
So you had two heroes for your senators. One was John McCain, who saved health care in the United States by voting no, let's not get rid of Obamacare. And Jeff Flake, who potentially, of course, is questioning Mr. Kavanaugh and wants a further investigation. So we'll see what happens. If people are responsible for their own suffering, we feel less obligated to help them, of course. So when we see victims, a lot of times we go, it's because they're poor, it's because of this, it's because of that. We look for reasons as to why they are victims. We blame the victim for their situation, and of course this is the saddest thing, is that we blame women for being either sexually molested or raped. It's really a tragic situation. That's what the Me Too movement is all about in the United States, is let's not, there are a number of women who have had this problem, relatively large number of women, 2/3 of all.
It's a wasp.
Oh.
Oh, shoot.
We need to
I
catch
do
it.
not want to get stung.
We don't know if we
Okay, okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. I was all worried about that. 'Cause, man, I was like, y'all, I don't have my EpiPen. You're gonna have to.
You're a Jeff.
Y'all,
Not a John
team up
McGinn,
to
but-
save a life.
Did you stain your hat?
No.
Okay, so now we're blaming the victim, and of course, 2 out of every 3 women, is it still alive?
Yeah, I want to step on it.
I sting you through your shoe.
Really?
No.
I'm gonna walk all over.
I want to have babies later. So I want to feel nothing.
So, okay, so this can be potentially be a problem. 2 out of every 3 women that are raped never admit that they have been raped. And this is really a serious situation. I did turn that on, okay. In 2008, approximately 21 million criminal victimizations occurred. 60 million involved property crimes and 5 million crimes. There were 5 million crimes of violence. Lots of crime out there. Lots of robberies. Lots of people being violent toward one another. This is an old case. October 1998. Two powerfully built men lured slightly built gay Matthew Shepard into their truck. They took him up into the mountains and beat him to death because of his sexual orientation. He was gay. Well, he's gay. I said it right there. But they beat him to death. They left him naked and tied to a fence post. This was in Wyoming. Interestingly enough, it was in Wyoming. He died 2 days later. But these are the two individuals that did the beating, and there's Matthew before he died. Victim. He was a victim. Legislators have been increasingly concerned about the proliferation of hate crimes, criminal acts intended to harm or intimidate people because of their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, or other minority group status. And of course, this is what Charlottesville was all about. Charlottesville had to do with, it was a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. There were a lot of angry people over the fact that they were allowing these people to express themselves. This white supremacist and neo-Nazi movement. That's when I first heard the word Antifa. Antifa means anti-fascist. Fascists, of course, were the Nazis during World War II. It was also the Italians. It was also the Spanish, but we won't go into that. The Nazis were the primary group of fascists that tried to take over the world. There are groups of people in the United States that are fascist to this day. The white supremacist group, the neo-Nazis, potentially are fascists. So the Antifa movement has to do with people that do not like the idea of fascism. The people that are fighting against white supremacists and against the neo-Nazi groups. Now, if you read conservative media, they talk about Antifa all the time like it's this organized group of individuals that are wandering around trying to disrupt and destroy these good Americans, these loyal Americans, these white supremacists and neo-Nazis. But the reality is, of course, that was what was going on in Charlottesville. We had the fascist movement being they were marching for fascism. The federal government in 45 states have enacted laws that allow stiffer sentencing for defendants convicted of hate crimes. Well, the other question that you have to ask yourself is, well, there's 50 states in the Union, so who are the 5 states that don't convict people for hate crimes? Any guesses as to where these states are?
Like southern states?
Yeah, how did you know? Yeah, they're all southern states. So you can have, perform a hate crime in the South, and you won't be indicted for it, as strange as that may seem. But of course, the federal government can. So if a state refuses to convict somebody of a hate crime, the federal government can come in and they can convict the individual instead. And this is how we changed civil rights in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, Arkansas. All the southern states did not have laws on their books showing that a hate crime was anything negative. So the federal government came in, and they are the ones that convicted people of hate crimes in those states. And theoretically, of course, it stopped those movements in the South and led to a more equal interactions in the South. Victimization of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender students. 65% of students indicated, these are LGBT students, 65% of the students indicated that they have been harassed during the last year. 39% reported harassment due to their appearance, and 33% said that they were harassed because of their actual or perceived sexual orientation. So we have LGBT students are being attacked at a fairly high rate just because of their sexual orientation. LGBT students were 3 times as likely to report feeling unsafe at school, 22% versus 7% of non-LGBT students, and 1.5 times as likely to have been harassed. 90% of them were harassed versus 62% of non-LGBT students. More teachers, 53% than students, 36% reported that they considered bullying or harassment to be a serious problem at their school. So we see teachers are seeing it and they are identifying it more readily than students are. But then again, some of the students that we're talking about are the actual bullies, and they don't see themselves as bullies. I guess that's not that strange. Megan Meier, I don't know if you remember Megan Meier, this is in Baltimore if I'm not mistaken, over there on the East Coast. She was a fragile teen suffering from depression, she had ADHD, and she was obsessed with her weight. After supposedly dissing her friend, the friend and her mother, the mother of the friend, retaliated by creating a fake MySpace account of a boy and flirting with Meier, so they pretended that they were a boy. And this was being done not so much by her 13-year-old friend, but mostly by the mother. It was the mother of the girl, because she had insulted her or had dissed her in one form or another. One fateful day, the ersatz boyfriend ranted about how Megan was not a good friend and that the world would be better off if you weren't in it. Megan promptly went into her room and hung herself with a belt in her closet. She was only 13 years old, and her friend was only 13 years old. This is a mother defending her daughter by attacking another 13-year-old, and the 13-year-old committed suicide. The mother was convicted. But this was on the internet, so this was all brand new stuff. We weren't exactly sure we could prosecute this case, but they did. They were able to prosecute it in Maryland. Technological advancements have brought new forms of victimization, identity theft, in which information about individuals' personal and financial life is stolen by computer hackers, and then it's used fraudulently. We've discovered that the Russians and the Chinese have been doing this for a while, and they actually used it in the last election. And that may be one of the reasons why, wait a minute, the guy that was elected actually lost the popular vote by 3 million votes, which is a lot of votes. That's more than anybody has ever won an election, and or won an election even though they lost the popular vote. So that was the most that we had ever seen it. But we've seen it before, where they actually won the electoral college, but they lost the popular vote. George W. Bush never won an election. He never won the popular vote in any election. He lost both of his elections as far as the popular vote was concerned, but he won the electoral vote. Abraham Lincoln, of course.
No.
Yeah. Rutherford B. Hayes was another one who didn't actually win the popular vote, but he did win the election. Cyber stalking is a technique favored by some sexual predators as a way to target victims. It's known as sexual stalking. They act like what do they call it? Catfishing? Is that catfishing? Where they pretend that they're the opposite sex and they try to get people to, I don't know, become romantically involved with them despite the fact they're not actually the person they say they are. Okay, catfishing. There used to be a television show about catfishing, right? Is it still on? I hope not. It is? Is it?
I haven't seen it lately.
Oh, see, you guys don't watch the good stuff. Cyberbullying.
That's a lot of times, that's why.
Cyberbullying can occur through blogs, Facebook, and other social networking sites where you bully somebody. And of course, this has happened to me a couple times. I'm kind of hard to bully since, you know.
You were bullied.
Yes.
I know. But if I'm ever in Indiana, that guy's going to shoot me with his deer rifle. I know, I can't wait. Maybe he's the one that left the message where
That's
he
what I
just
was
fired the
gonna
gun 3
say.
times. I thought it was Sharon, but I'm not sure.
He's like, oh, sure, it's her.
Yeah. Yeah, she's got her guns and she's just popping away.
Just has it on speaker.
In addition to cyberbullying, psychologists have identified 4 other subtypes of bullying. Physical bullying, of course, that's what we see here, where the guy grabs him and picks on him. Verbal bullying, where they say mean things to you. Social exclusion. I think I've told you the story about when I was in college. I didn't sing the school song, so I refused to have my hair shaved in the shape of a W. So they socially ostracized me, which meant that I couldn't go to any events on campus. Then I ran track, and I was running cross country at the time. I wasn't a very good cross country runner, but then I ran track and started breaking records. It was kind of hard to exclude me, but they were able to do it. To the extent that, to this day, if my picture, if I get my picture somewhere, they will cut me out of the picture. I know. I've got a picture of me at a reunion, a college reunion. I am standing right there singing the school song that I got in so much trouble for. But I'm standing right here, and they moved the picture over to cut me out of the picture. So they've got this big empty space over here. I know, this big empty space in the picture, and just so that I'm not in the picture.
Should have been like, I'm the shortest, I should be up front and in the middle. Just ran over there.
I didn't know they were taking the picture, and I didn't know they were going to cut me out. I mean, that was kind of strange. So that's social exclusion. How painful was it? Well, it wasn't too bad for me, but I was one of 8 people that didn't sing the school song. We were all socially ostracized. I was the only one that graduated. But then again, like I said, I ran track, and because I ran track, it was hard to socially ostracize me. At one point, the fraternities were the ones that socially ostracized me. The members of the fraternity were actually on my relay team. So, I mean, they could have kicked me off the relay team, I guess, or they could have gone to the coach and said, I don't want you on the relay team, but they didn't do that because I was the second fastest guy. So, they would be cutting off their nose to spite their face. Anyway, social exclusion. And this went on for 4 years. This is my freshman year. I was socially ostracized. And after that, I went through 4 years of not being able to go to dances, which wasn't that big a deal. I got married when I was a sophomore, so I was dancing, but I wasn't dancing.
Over there.
Okay, yeah, over there. Okay. And of course, spreading rumors about people, that's another way of bullying people. Males were more likely to be victims of all types of bullying. Females, of course, it usually isn't physical bullying, but the other 3 are very common as far as females are concerned. This chapter concentrates on 4 types of victims and the effects of victimization on these individuals. People who experience adversity and trauma in childhood, targets of sexual harassment, battered spouses, and victims of violent crime, particularly rape. The crime that has been studied most often is rape. Strange, not that strange, I guess. And this is the reason that we know that 1 out of every 6 women in the United States will be raped, is because of all these studies that we've done. This is a silent crime. This is a crime that we have a difficult time prosecuting, for one thing, because if you are the defense attorney and you have an individual that's been accused of rape, how are you going to defend your client? What are you going to do? What are you going to say about this guy? Well, you're not going to say anything about this guy. Oh, well, you're probably going to say, look, he's an upstanding citizen. He's never done any of this stuff before. So how in the world are you going to defend him? This lady claims that he raped her. So how do you defend this guy? Where'd she go? He? She?
Oh, yeah. With babysitter.
Okay. Oh, okay. I was worried. You locked him in the bathroom?
No.
He'll get out. So what do you do? How do you defend How do you defend your potential rapist? Your alleged rapist? How do you do it? And this is the problem with the jurisprudence system. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to talk about what a wonderful person he is, but what are they going to do as far as the victim is concerned? They're going to attack her. It's the only way they can defend him. Now the sad part is that they have to put up as strong a defense as they possibly can. If they don't, they can get disbarred. So if you are defending somebody who is a potential rapist, and that's what happened with Hillary Clinton. She was a public defender. She was given a rape case. She had to, or it was sexual molestation, wasn't it? Weren't you the one talking about?
It was rape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she actually had to defend a rapist.
Yeah.
And she won the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in order to be a lawyer, she has to do her job. She doesn't have a choice. I mean, will nobody defend this person?
Nobody wants to, but it's fair.
Somebody has to,
Yeah.
and they will assign somebody, and that's actually what happened with Hillary. There are two kinds of experience to consider in the course of human development. Experiences that are emotionally painful, overwhelming for the individual's capacity to cope effectively. Examples of this would be physical abuse, sexual abuse, or severe neglect. Or chronic adversity that results from influences such as poverty and racism. And so these are the two things that can really get to people, really distress and destroy people. The relationship between traumatic childhood experiences and physical and emotional health outcomes in adult life is at the core of the adverse child experience study. They did a study. It was a longitudinal study. It was in at the end of the 20th century in 1999. They did the ACE study, and they were looking at children and trying to determine how much damage was being done by all of these negative things. The ACE study involved the study of people who experienced recurrent physical and emotional abuse, contact sexual abuse. That would be contact sexual abuse is sexual abuse where the individual is actually touched, not exposing oneself to somebody wouldn't be contact sexual abuse. So contact sexual abuse is actually physical sexual abuse. An alcohol and or drug abuser in the household, an incarcerated household member, a household member who is chronically depressed, mentally ill, institutionalized, or suicidal, a mother who is treated violently, so your mother is treated in a negative manner, one or no parents, emotional or physical neglect. 1999. How old was I in 1999? How old were my kids? My daughter was born in 1969, so she's 30 in 1999. We couldn't have been part of this study. Okay. The ACE study has two major findings. Adverse child experiences are much more common than anticipated or recognized, sadly enough. It really doesn't have anything to do with poverty, doesn't have anything to do with socioeconomic status. It has to do with families. So if you have a family, potentially you have an adverse childhood experience, no matter how wealthy they are. Adverse childhood experiences have a strong relationship with health outcomes later in life. Now, if this sounds like it has to do with Freudian theories of personality, it fits right in, doesn't it? Because Freud said that we need to go back and we need to determine what happened to somebody in their childhood to figure out what their problem is today. So we have to go back and look at that in order to figure out why they're having a problem currently. So this kind of fits in with Freud, as shocking as that is. Whittam in 1989 and 1992 found that abused or neglected children were significantly more likely than a comparison group to have been arrested for violent crimes as juveniles or as adults. Okay, so what does this violence have to do with what happened to them as a child? Why in the world, as adults, are they being violent? What does violence have to do with anything? Why are they being violent? They're the ones that were abused. They were the ones that were being neglected. So why are they being violent in the future as adults? Shouldn't they have learned not to be violent? That's not what happened, is it? It's the very opposite. So the more, if they have been neglected or abused, they're more likely to be violent. So why are they more violent?
Normalized behavior, it's condoned, I guess. to
So
a
they see it as
certain-
normalized behavior. I guess that's logical. We actually have no answer for this. I thought maybe you guys would have the answer. I was hoping. We can't. We have no way to answer this question. Each case is probably going to be different, but normalized behavior is one reason. Can anybody come up with another reason?
Imitation. Like imitation. Like
So they're imitating?
Yeah, learned behavior.
Imitating, yeah, they're mimicking negative behavior. That makes sense. So mimicking normalized behavior. Okay. Anybody else? Come on, let's be brilliant today. Let's think. What could it possibly be? Why are these people being violent? I like those two answers. They're two very large probabilities.
What about what we were talking about once in your office, where it was like the rejection from the parent, and the child copies the parent that was rejecting him or her to try to find a better connection to that parent
So they're trying to identify with the negative parent.
instead of the victimized parent.
I know, that doesn't make any sense, does it? I mean, if you've got one parent that's nice to you and the other one that's mean, why in the world would you identify with the mean parent? But that's the way it works. So they try to act like the negative parent so that parent will start paying attention to them.
Because they're more like them.
I know, this is weird, isn't it? The way this works. You should identify with the really good parent, right?
But that doesn't.
It's not the way it works. You identify with the abusing parent.
Because that's where I guess the disrupted attention is.
Right. Exactly. So this is something you need to remember for the future. If you're ever dealing with a child and the child is acting out, the child may be acting like the negative parent. Is probably acting like the negative parent because they're trying to get the negative parent to pay attention to them. My grandson, he's only 7 years old. He just turned 7. Did he? Yeah. Or did he just turn 6? Wait a minute. Born in 72. Just turned 6. Okay. He's playing football because his dad played football. Well, his dad's down in Florida. He's being raised in Iowa. So he's playing flag football. And his dad told him, well, you know, when I was playing football, they used me as a blocking back. So guess what this kid volunteers to do every time? Yeah, exactly. Does he volunteer to carry the ball? He's really fast. No, he wants to be a blocking back, like his dad. He identifies with his father. As strange as that is, despite the fact that his father's not there. The other day, he tried to call his dad up on the telephone. He had 2 football games, tried to call him up on the telephone to tell him how he did in the game, and his dad was out on a date, and it wouldn't take the call. And he kept calling him and kept calling him and kept calling him, and he kept getting more and more and more upset because he did exactly what his dad did when he was playing football, and he got sadder and sadder and sadder and sadder. He carried the ball 1 time in the whole game, scored a touchdown. Not that that's important, it's not important. But the rest of the time, he was a blocking back. Well, it turns out this is the smallest kid on the team. You know, he's only 6 years old.
He's more of a Bradley.
Well, yeah, he's fast. You should run around everybody else. Not be a blocking back. My goodness gracious. Well, we'll see what happens. Recently, we don't want him to play football because of all this brain injury stuff that's going on. Yeah, we don't want him to play football. It's flag football, so it's not tackle. But, yeah, he's having a good time. Being a blocking back. Of course, all he can do is get in somebody's way. I mean, it's not like he can knock him down or anything. He's a Bradway. He's like, you know, he's going to top end at about 145 pounds. Recently, many have acknowledged the need to recognize and serve crime victims. For example, since the late 1970s, the interdisciplinary field of victimology has emerged. Before the 1970s, when I first started in psychology, there was no such thing as victimology. This is all brand new stuff. They even have their own. Journals. Violence and Victims is one of the journals that they have. There is increasing availability of services to crime victims, including compensation. Once upon a time, if you were a rape victim, that was it. You went to the police department. Police department took you to the hospital. They did a rape kit on you, and then they sent you home, and that was it. Nobody called you on the phone. The only way that you got any help was if you called a counselor, and of course you had to pay for the counselor yourself. There was nothing out there. There were no women's shelters to go to back in the 70s. This is a brand new thing. I went to an all-male college, and it's still an all-male college. But this weekend they had homecoming, and they donated all of their proceeds from homecoming to the women's shelter in Montgomery County, which is where the college is. It's an all-male college. And of course, they didn't come up with this until just before homecoming, but it had something to do with the Kavanaugh Ford situation. And that's the reason they donated all their money to the women's shelter, this all-male college. Now, it could be that, men are behind each other all the way, and it's none of their fault and whatnot, but no, these guys got together and they decided that they were going to donate all their money to the women's shelter in Montgomery, which is I see it as a really positive thing. I mean, they are somewhat misogynistic in that it's all male, so, but here they have enough social knowledge that they tried to help the women's shelter in Montgomery County. Okay, so back in the old days, back when I was in college, back when I was starting in psychology, there were no services for crime victims. Now there are, and it's expanding. There's expanded opportunity for victims to participate in the trials of their victimizers. There's heightened focus on victims brought by new journals, and of course, I already talked about violence and victims. Individuals who suffer a severe trauma and later experience intense fear-related reactions when reminded of the trauma may be experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. With the case of Blasi Ford, and I hate to keep harping on what's going on in politics today, but in the case of Blasi Ford, this individual, despite the fact that she was 15 when she was sexually molested, when she builds a house, she makes sure that she has there's another door. There's always 2 escape routes in every room. So her bedroom has to have a door to the outside so that she can escape if somebody comes in through the house. Or if they come in through that door, she can escape out the other door. So all of her rooms have at least 2 doors. There are no cul-de-sacs in her house. And this has to do with the fact that when she was 15 years old, she allegedly was trapped by Brett Kavanaugh and his friend in a potential rape. She's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. She had never told anybody about this. Now, when she was 15, she didn't talk about this until she was, 8 years ago? So that was 28 years later. She finally told somebody about this alleged molestation. So she's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the examples is the fact that she hates to be in confined spaces. She doesn't like to fly in airplanes because it's too confined a space. So they were afraid that she wouldn't fly from California to Washington, D.C. For the hearing, but she did. She was able to do that. By definition, such trauma must involve a threat of serious injury or death. And of course, she was afraid that when he had his hand over her mouth, keeping her from screaming, he was going to strangle her to death. And that's what she was afraid of. She wasn't just afraid of the rape, she was also afraid that he would kill her. The symptoms of PTSD fall into 3 categories, and of course you must have these symptoms that last longer than 1 month. Frequent re-experiencing of the event, flashbacks and repeated nightmares. Persistent avoidance of the stimuli associated with the trauma and a general numbing or deadening of emotions. Increased physiological arousal resulting in exaggerated startle responses or difficulty sleeping. Last year in abnormal psychology, was anybody in abnormal psychology last year? I admitted that I have PTSD. It's the first time I'd ever realized it. And the problem had to do with the smell of dead bodies. Of course, none of you guys ever have to worry about that kind of stuff. But when I was in the service, one of my jobs was picking up bodies. I was picking up mostly from airplane crashes. And because they were in an airplane crash, there had been a fire, and the fire had burned the body. And of course, that's one of the problems that, or one of the odors that I detected that other people probably have never come in contact with. But unfortunately, of course, and this happened to me a number of times, because I picked up a number of bodies that had been burned, I smelled what it smelled like. And unfortunately, it smells very similar to mutton. It smells like mutton. And I apologize, I know that it's traditional as far as you guys are concerned, but I can't, if I smell it, I get a reaction from it. And it's a negative reaction, and I don't like the reaction. It's not a lot of fun. So I was okay until I came to a place where you guys cook mutton. So now I try not to walk past any place Francis is working, because Francis works in the chow hall, the cafeteria, and you guys used to cook mutton all the time. Yeah, so it was bad. Not only that, but of course, anytime they have one of these seminar things, they always cook mutton. And I just can't do it. Anyway, so I have a negative reaction to this. I have PTSD, and I didn't realize it because I was able to stay away from that odor. I mean, how often do you go around people cooking each other, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. But how often do you go around people cooking sheep? Well, down here it's all the time. But in Iowa, I don't have to worry about it because they don't eat mutton up there. They eat beef and they eat pork, but they don't eat mutton. It's not my fault. I try to control it. So it got kind of bad last year. It was pretty bad.
Over the week or last week when we had our family's protection week ceremony, my brothers, my brother and my husband didn't want to participate in sheep butchering.
Same reason.
Yeah, a lot of, even just with the gurgling sounds, and then when it coughed too, and they're slicing the throat, they're just like, I'm done, I can't be here.
I gotta get out of here.
Yeah, so it's just like, and they did not even, well, my brother didn't know that he would have that reaction, so he went over there to help, but then he got that reaction. He was like, I gotta get out of here. He's like, I cannot be there.
Yeah, and it's you can't even describe it.
No.
Yeah.
That's just why he's just like,
it's the willies.
No.
It's just what that guy's hair is doing.
Yeah.
You got to get away from it. You just got to get away from it. And it's not my fault. It's not their fault. It's just what I experienced.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, was in a traumatic situation. The first body I picked up was a friend of mine. Of course, wouldn't it be a friend of mine?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. First baseman for one of the teams. Of course, I played softball, so kind of ugly situation. How common is PTSD? The lifetime prevalence of PTSD among adult Americans was estimated to be about 6.8%, which isn't that high. At 3.6% prevalence for men and 9.7% for women. Of course, women, why would women have a higher PTSD rate than men? More men serve in combat, so why are women so sensitive to PTSD?
Sexual assault.
Sexual assault. Okay. That's a lot. PTSD is more commonly, and I didn't think I had PTSD until I came down here. Sorry.
You're welcome.
So it's your fault.
Now you know.
Now I know. Oh, good. Now I know what the hell's my problem.
Now we know why you're boring.
Actually, yeah, I know why I'm boring. I actually ate mutton once. This was when I was in the service. And I had a negative reaction to it, but I didn't think anything about it until it was a constant here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, the first time I went to one of those seminars, I was thinking, oh man, I can handle this. And no. Yeah, it was ugly. PTSD is more commonly experienced in military veterans than those in the general population. And it really has to do with their situation. One of the things we discovered after Vietnam was that about 1 out of every 3 individuals will suffer from PTSD. The individuals who suffer PTSD the most were not the individuals that were in the most violent combat. It was the individuals that had no control over what happened to them, the lower ranking individuals. The officers, the NCOs, who had some control over what was going on, these individuals didn't suffer from PTSD because they felt like they had control. It was the lower ranking individuals that were the ones that suffered from PTSD. That was one of the factors. The other factor had to do with whether they had been abused as children. If they had been abused as children or neglected or sexually abused, physically abused or neglected as children, then they were more likely to develop PTSD. I used to tell the story that all 4 of my brothers all 4 of us were Vietnam vets, and only one of us suffered from PTSD. Now I know that there's 2 of us, and maybe all 4 of us in reality. But I had a brother. So what was his trauma as a child? His trauma as a child had to do with his trauma had to do with the fact he had rheumatic fever when he was in the 2nd grade, and he missed his entire 2nd grade. But instead of setting him back, they allowed him to do his homework at home, and he was still advanced. But he missed a whole year of school, and that was the trauma that he felt. Now, what trauma did I have when I was a child? Are you ready for this? It has to do with odor. When I was 3 years old, they pulled out all my teeth, and they took me to the hospital, and they put me out with ether. Oh God, I don't know if you've ever smelled ether. Oh man. So I'm really sensitive to smells. As it turns out, I'm sensitive to smells. And it comes from the fact that after they knocked me out with ether, I vomited like a house afire for like 2 days. They were afraid they were going to have to give me IVs and whatnot. But I was only 3 years old. They didn't want to do that. So my trauma as a child had to do with them pulling out my teeth. And then they gave me false teeth, which was really exciting. I know, I was a 4-year-old with false teeth, okay? That wasn't traumatizing. I ate them. I actually chewed them up. And my mother got mad at me for eating my false teeth. And to the day she died, she complained about the fact that she had to pay for another set of false teeth. You know, $35.95 or whatever it was. But anyway, she had to pay for another set of false teeth. Jeez, I should have just given her the cash. You know, I'm sorry. And she kept telling me, stop chewing on your false teeth, stop chewing on your false teeth. But they tasted so good that I just ate them up. Nice flavor. Who is more likely to develop PTSD? Military service is a risk factor for PTSD, of course. Not everybody, as long as you're in charge, as long as you have control over the situation, potentially you will not develop PTSD. The extent of injury during trauma predicts whether PTSD symptoms will develop. I need to tell you something about the 2 brothers that didn't develop PTSD. One was in intelligence, which is a misnomer. And the other one was a guard at the embassy, okay? So neither of them had anything to do with combat. And I have no, maybe they got drunk and visited prostitutes every night. I have no idea what they did. But anyway, they had a really good time. And my other brother and I, he was in combat and I was in aerovac. So I got to pick up dead bodies all the time. I know, a lot of fun. Medevac. We didn't want to leave anybody behind, okay? The extent of injury during trauma predicts whether PTSD symptoms will develop. The belief that victim's life is in danger and that he or she has no control over the trauma increases risk of PTSD. So it has to do with control, and it also has to do with feeling like you're in danger. And if you've ever been shot at, of course, you feel like, oh man, if I had been... One time I was flying in a helicopter, and we're flying between two mountains, and I leaned over to talk to the door gunner, and the guy behind me was standing up for no reason whatsoever, and he was standing, and of course it's only like 5 feet in one of those helicopters, and I leaned over and I'm talking to this guy, and a bullet comes in and hits this guy right in the forehead, blows his brains out. If I had been standing up instead of talking to the door gunner, I would have been the one hit by that round. It was just one bullet. We only got by one bullet. Evidently it was a sniper. I don't know. And he was we were between two mountains. So evidently it was a sniper shooting into our helicopter. And he was aiming at me. I know. And I just leaned over and this guy gets shot in the head. Anyway, he was a tall guy too. So he's all bent over like this. Of course, I could almost stand up in the helicopter, and that's how short I am. But he's the one that got shot. I'm glad it wasn't me. And, so what should I feel? Should I feel, oh man, survivor's remorse? Hell no. I'm glad it was him and not me. I didn't want to get shot. I had 2 kids at home. I didn't want to get shot. Note that although many persons who experience severe trauma may develop acute stress disorder, trauma-related symptoms that last less than 1 month, most do not go on to develop PTSD. So just because you've been in a traumatic situation, like the floods, like the tsunami that just hit Indonesia, just because you're in that kind of a situation, you're in danger, you could have died, that doesn't mean you're going to develop PTSD. There's a lot of really tough people out there. In social psychology, I show a film of a lady that was just in a hurricane in Moore, Oklahoma. Her house was completely destroyed. Completely destroyed. The only reason she survived is because she was sitting on the toilet. You think, the toilet? Sure, it's ceramic. Yeah, it's connected to a really thick pipe under the ground. So everything else was knocked down. All the wood was knocked down. Because the bathtub was right beside her, it was like the only part of the house that wasn't destroyed. And she got upset because her dog was gone. That's the only reason she was upset. So the news person came and they were trying to talk her into being unhappy. Well, your dog's dead. Yeah, but I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm really happy that I'm alive. And then they found the dog, which was alive, of course. I know. But this lady's, they're trying to talk her into being unhappy, you know. Show us some tears, honey. But she's too tough. One reason may be that those experiencing trauma but not PTSD tend to receive high levels of social support immediately following the event. So the more support that these individuals get, whether it's social support or whatever type of support it is, they're less likely to suffer from PTSD. And this is the reason that we have gone to this form of trying to help the victims. Because they are, if we do this, then they're less likely to develop PTSD. And of course, PTSD is a very painful thing. Of course, those who develop PTSD often perceive the world as a dangerous place from which they must retreat, and they come to view themselves as helpless to deal with stressors. FOA et al. In 1995 have developed a course designed to attack these misconceptions in women who have been raped or assaulted. So if they feel like they're in danger and that the world is a dangerous place. I have a lot of friends who, when they leave, people in Hogan housing, that we have a system that if you turn it on, it'll call security if somebody tries to break in your house. Mine, I don't ever turn mine on. I'm not that paranoid. I don't lock my car. If you guys want something out of my car, it's unlocked. It's over in that parking lot over there. There's nothing in it. I don't know what you're going to take. Write it down. It's a make me out of. There we go. I don't lock my car, but I have friends who lock their car. Well, Marius does. He locks his car every time he gets out of his vehicle. And I'm thinking, what, you don't trust other Navajos? What's going on here? What's going on? But I don't ever lock my car, and I haven't locked my car since I was up.
Brad, these are broke college students. Lock your door.
What's in my car to take? You gonna take my gear shift knob or something? What's that? It's the gear shift knob.
Right.
It's for a standard transmission car. Does anybody have a standard transmission? What a bunch of wimps. I swear.
But I usually shift her as a back.
It's got numbers on it. It doesn't have a D and an R. What's that for?
It's a nice, heavy, fancy baton.
So when I go to other people's houses in Hogan Housing, they always turn on their alarms when they leave their house. And I'm thinking, come on. Anyway. So they live in a more dangerous world than I do. I have a friend that has lots and lots of guns. He's got 18,000 rounds of ammunition. He trades some of those rounds out every year so that he always has 18,000 good rounds of ammunition. He has 4 military weapons, AR-15. He's got an MP5. He's got 2 pistols. This guy lives in a really dangerous world. He lives in a gated community in Muncie, Indiana.
Oh, jeez.
I know. How dangerous is a gated community in Muncie, Indiana? Why do you need 18,000 rounds of ammunition? What is the danger? And I've asked him that question.
The elks are going to get in.
The elves.
It's going to be a big herd.
Yeah.
The herd of mammoths. that they're
And he can kill 18,000 of them. What is he afraid of?
Wow.
What is there to be afraid of in Muncie, Indiana?
Mosquitoes?
Black people? Are all the blacks going to suddenly rise up and try to kill all the goofy little old white guys?
I don't know. You got movies
With
out
hair
there.
growing out of their noses and hair growing out of their ears?
Maybe he's setting up for the purge.
Well, you know, there isn't a zombie apocalypse out there that's just waiting for us to come. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know what his problem is. And I asked him, and he unfriended me. He took me off his Facebook page because I kept asking him what he was so afraid of. I told him I didn't have a gun. He said, "You don't have a gun? You know you live on a reservation, don't you?" "Really? I do? Oh my God. Where am I? Should I be afraid of you guys?" You just killed a wasp. Survival of the fittest. FOA includes the following in her course: education in common psychological reactions to assault, so victims see that their responses are normal. Training in skills such as relaxation. The one thing, everybody has a different reaction. They think, oh my God, I'm the only one having this reaction. But of course, almost everybody's reaction is very similar to another person's reaction. You have an extreme reaction. That's okay. This happens to people. And that's one of the things that FOA shows. They try to teach you to relax, which my friend needs. He's screaming about, well, I won't tell you what he's screaming about, but it usually has something to do with right-wing conspiracy about Hillary Clinton. I swear, she must be the biggest monster in the world. We heard about Kavanaugh says it's the Clintons that are trying to destroy his opportunity to get on the Supreme Court. Those Clintons, they're just monsters. Emotionally reliving the trauma to allow victims to diffuse their fears of the trauma. One of the things they did with people who were suffering from PTSD in Vietnam, They were having negative reactions to helicopters. I did have a negative reaction to a helicopter. I was in 2 helicopters that crashed. Controlled descent, okay? That's what they call it. They didn't really crash. That officially it was a controlled descent, where the pilot acted, since we weren't cavitating, we weren't spinning around and around. Since he was able to maintain a plane, and we did hit really, really hard twice, but neither time were we, everybody wasn't killed either time, so it wasn't a crash, I guess. We didn't catch on fire either time, thank God. One of the things they did with people in Vietnam, from Vietnam, they would take them up in helicopters. They'd give them helicopter rides. These guys have been afraid of helicopters ever since they were in Vietnam. Now the thing about Vietnam was that if you were in the Army, then they flew you to some place in a helicopter, and then they landed and let you out, and then of course, then you were in danger. So helicopters meant danger to them. With me, it was the opposite. Not like they were picking me up. It was like I stayed in the helicopter. But of course, we did crash those 2 times. So helicopters were. I can still feel a helicopter when it is any place in the area. I can still feel it. You can feel it in your chest. It's really kind of, maybe I have more PTSD than I thought. But it's one of the things that they do. They teach you. They teach you that it's not dangerous anymore. I had a heart attack in 2010, and of course they had to life flight me out. Well, they don't fly you in an airplane; they fly you in a helicopter. So here I am, and they put me in a helicopter, and of course I'm dying of a heart attack anyway. So he's got all this stuff on me. He said, "Oh my God, you're in a helicopter. You're in a helicopter, and your blood pressure just went sky high." That kind of thing. Well, I've already experienced this before. Anyway, so they do. They try to diffuse it. They go over the trauma that you have been through, and by going over it time and time again, seeing that it's no longer dangerous for you, a lot of times it will dissipate your trauma. Cognitive restructuring to help women replace negative beliefs about their competence and their adequacy. A lot of times women, and this is what happened with Blasi Ford, with Christine Blasi Ford. She had to go to marriage therapy with her husband because of her sexual assault when she was 15 years old. Because there was something wrong with their marriage, and you can only imagine that it probably had something to do with her sexual response was relatively negative, especially if he approached her in a select manner. That was probably the problem. Can we talk about that? Is that all right? Have I just passed crossed the taboo? No? Are we all right? Okay. Yeah, so potentially what was going on, she was probably responding relatively negatively to select ways that he approached her in the marriage bed. And so she was responding negatively, and that's probably what happened. Or maybe she wasn't responding at all. So she was, they were sleeping in different places, not different towels, but in different rooms in the house or something. So they needed counseling. And this is one of the things she mentioned, which is difficult to talk about. I mean, how many people want to talk about sex in marriage? Nobody does. But she had to. Victims who had completed FOA's prevention course had fewer PTSD symptoms than control subjects who had not received treatment. And of course, that is the way it works. Prevalence rates. Estimates suggest that 33% of men and 25% of women have been involved in a physically aggressive altercation. 33% of men, 1 out of every 3 men, and there's 6 males in here. So potentially 2 of us have been in a physical altercation. Although in relationships, females to male aggression is as frequent as male to female aggression, male aggression is significantly more likely to result in serious injuries. In other words, a lot of times it's the woman that's attacking the man. This happens more than the man will admit. I was an abused spouse when I was married to my first wife. Tough. It was really tough. I couldn't... well, she stabbed me. I told you she stabbed me and I couldn't do anything about it. And the reason I couldn't do anything about it is because I was in the military and I would have gotten in trouble. They would have kicked me out of base housing because my wife stabbed me. And the idea was, since I was in the military, she wasn't, they couldn't do anything to her, they couldn't touch her, but they could do something to me. And because I wasn't controlling my wife, I would have gotten in trouble. So I couldn't do anything about it. So, and not only that, but they would have given me the horse laugh when I'd gone into the emergency room. What happened to you? Well, my wife stabbed me. Oh, really? What's this other wound on your arm? Oh, well, she stabbed me earlier today. Oh, really? Why didn't you do something? Why didn't you just punch her in the face? I don't hit people. Right now, anyway. I certainly wouldn't hit my wife.
But the guy at the bar's a different story.
Well, that's not all that happened. I won't go into whatever happened after that. About 30% of all the women murdered in the United States each year are killed by their male partners. 33%. So the most dangerous person to a woman is probably their significant other. Really? Yeah. The most dangerous person to a pregnant woman is her spouse or the man that got her pregnant, if it was her spouse. Really? Yes. It's the most dangerous person to you. It's not an automobile accident. It's not your mother-in-law. It's your significant other. My daughter was hit twice by the man that impregnated her. And both times she was pregnant when he hit her. Both times. And one time he punched her in the stomach. This guy that's 6'4" and weighs 250 pounds. My daughter's all of 4'11", and if she weighs over 100 pounds, then she's a little fatter than she needs to be. But here she is, she's being abused by a man that's 2.5 times her size. And 1.5 feet taller than she is. Why would somebody do that? And luckily she didn't tell us, my son and I, until after she left this guy. Otherwise, something might have happened. Not that I'm ever physically violent. I'm never physically violent. But my son, who is a bartender, gets to be physically violent all the time. Fallingstead in 1994 identified the following myths. Battered women are masochists. They like it. They provoke the assault inflicted on them because they like it. They get the treatment they deserve because they like it. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. They are free to leave these violent relationships anytime they want to, so evidently they like it. Violence among intimate partners is not common. Is any of this true? There are people that are masochistic. That's true, but it's a very tiny percentage of the population. Sadomasochists, we hope that they get together. Today I feel masochistic. Yeah, right, okay. Today I feel like somebody needs to hurt me. Really? Yeah, and there are people out there like that. Well, let's talk about somebody that's masochistic. Why would they be masochistic? Why would they find pleasure in pain? Let's be Freudian, for example, for a minute. Why would they like that? What happened to them as a child would make them like to be hurt? Have you ever been spanked and your parents told you this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. So you're doing this because, wait a minute, it hurts you more than it hurts me, but you seem to be smiling when you're doing it. I don't know, maybe that has something to do with it. Okay. So how many masochistic people are there out there? Well, there's not very many, actually. It's a relatively small percentage of the population. But now we have a clue as to why they like to be spanked, or why they like to be injured, or why they like to be damaged. These people are out there, but they're few and far between. And most people that are abused, of course, do not have these ideas. Men who are nonviolent in their dealings with outsiders behave the same way in their dealings with their intimates. Middle and upper class men don't batter, and middle and upper class women don't get beaten. These are more myths, by the way. I didn't tell you they were myths. Battering, I'm a low battery. Battering is a lower class ethnic minority phenomenon, and such women don't mind because this is part of their culture. Good battered women are passive and never try to defend themselves. These are all myths. None of this is true. Well, we saw all those wealthy people from that went to Georgetown Prep. My goodness gracious, they had all these strange drinking games. They had all these odd things that they were doing to each other. And these were the elite. This is an elite school. Why don't we stop right here, and I'll pick this up next time because my computer's about to die. Okay.